Hello, this is the second video of Chapter 2 lecture about why leisure is vital. And we're talking about 12 different benefits of leisure. And in this video, we begin with happiness, 30 benefits. So happiness is not a benefit of leisure. And that's why we have this course. And it's related to one of your assignments as well. And leisure satisfaction, or how satisfied you are with your leisure activities and leisure life, is positively related to overall well-being, happiness, at least as strongly as your job, work satisfaction. So maybe leisure is as important as work and job in terms of its benefit to your happiness. And the research supports that. Now, we talk about happiness in this textbook very generally, but what do we exactly mean by happiness? Let's take a moment to think about different ways to think about happiness. Philosophers, even from thousands of years ago, actually discussed the different types of happiness. For example, Aristotle, happiness was a concept and word called eudaimonia, which is a pursuit of moral action, good action, and excellence, being good at something, basically. Something like a math, philosophy, politics, and gymnastics, for example. And that's very different from what we mean usually, casually, by happiness, right? Today, like, for example, I may say, I'm so happy that, I'm eating ice cream in a hot day. I'm so happy, right? That's very different from like eudaimonia here, what Aristotle meant. So today's science has actually focused, science about happiness, focused on a positive emotion, like ice cream happy, in which we will talk in a pleasure section below more. But then we have also slowly recognized the importance of eudaimonic well-being, happiness that in our Aristotle sense, such as virtuousness, having a good characters, meaningfulness in your life, self-actualization, being really good at something. And many data and studies that are shared in this textbook chapter are not about eudaimonia and eudaimonic well-being. It's about pleasure, positive emotion, type of happiness. Okay, so there's two different things. We're going to talk about that more later. And then this textbook tends to focus on, positive emotion, pleasure, ice cream happiness. So I'm going to try to back it up a little bit with the different, more recent studies. Having said that, though, there is a couple interesting information in a chapter about their, positive emotion, happiness. For example, World Happiness Report. Literally, we have had, over the decades, past the decades, we have collected information of the happiness of the people in the different countries, and we have a world ranking, basically. And this ranking is slightly different because it's basically average between 2016 to 2018 rather than 2018 only. And you can see this report yourself if you Google search. So take a look if you're from actually some of the countries that are not listed here. But I thought these are very interesting to make a point. If you look at the top, still the same pattern. Scandinavian countries, some of the European countries like Denmark, Norway, Finland, they really have up high in it's consistent. Canada, where's Canada? It's around the top 10, give or take. UK is a little below, the US is a little farther below, in Japan, since I'm Japanese, it's far below, 58th. And China, another big country, 93rd, it's pretty low again, which is very interesting because first when we started to learn and research about happiness, we thought that happiness will be largely correlated with economic development of the country and also how much money you have, basically, how much resource you have, basically. So measure of that, that economic development can be measured by GDP or gross domestic product, I guess. Which is one of the big, commonly used national indicator of national development. According to that, though, USA is top. China became second over the past several years. Japan is a third. These are really high GDP country. they're not really happy if you look at the left side, right? And then you don't see a lot of Scandinavian country up top in a GDP. Now we have to also think about GDP, this economic development depends on how many people you have in your country. So we have something called a GDP per capita, GDP divided by population, number of people you live, we have in a country. Then the ranking started to look more like a happiness ranking. We have Norway at the pretty high, US, okay, Denmark, Finland, Canada, UK. But still, GDP per capita and happiness doesn't necessarily strongly correlate so much. It does correlate, but not so strongly as we expected before. And that to make a point that money doesn't necessarily buy us happiness. National wealth, it matters to our happiness, but not such a only strong determinant. There are many other things, including leisure, personal care as well. Another psychologist of happiness, Sonia Lyubomirsky, she wrote a book called The How of Happiness. And it's very readable, it's easy. It's based on research, but it's easy. So if you want to check it out, you can check it out. And in it, she made a very, very popular pie chart, and that's over here. That pie chart represents 3 broad categories of things that explain our happiness level, okay? And she argued, based on research, that about 50% of our happiness level, well, not a happiness level, but differences in our happiness. For example, my happiness level would be probably different from your happiness level, let's say from 0 to 100, right? I may say 75 and you go like 85. So there's that difference. And maybe someone next says 92, ooh, or the other person says 35, ooh, what's going on? So there's that difference in happiness, right? So 50% of that difference can be explained by, according to research and Lyubomirsky, genetics, gene, and personality traits. Now we actually, genetic research started to pinpoint maybe there's this part of a genetic code that have an impact on that difference. We know that extroverted people tend to report higher level of happiness. So that's a 50%. Another 10% is explained by something that we can't control either, which is basically life events. If you look at the right side here, life events, something like giving a birth to a child, getting married, experiencing disaster. Obviously, disaster is not a good thing. We had a wildfire, earthquake, tsunami. Going through will decrease your happiness. Now, what about marriage? Just digressing a little bit. What about marriage? What do you think? Do you think married people are happier than single people or divorced people? Just take a moment to think. Science says, research says, yes, it is. Only slightly, but marriage makes us happier. So there you go. There's a bit of a reason if you want to marry, there you go. Now, what about childbirth? This is a very tricky thing. Do you think it makes people happier? Research says no, actually. It makes people unhappy, less happy. Yes, it's ironic, right? But again, what's very important here, side note, is that here happiness means positive emotion more often, okay? So when you're giving a birth and when you have that baby infant, they're everything, the dirty thing, the poop, the diapers, the milk and the spill and everything, it make you, there's a lot of stress and negative emotion. It makes sense, right? But if you look at some more of a eudaimonic well-being, such as meaningfulness, things like that, maybe the story is very different. Maybe it actually makes people's life meaningful, giving a birth. So, don't worry about that too much. And the last part, which is the most important thing here, because it relates to leisure, is 40%. The rest of it is explained by intentional individual behavior, such as being kind to other people, right? Journaling, like a diary, and volunteering, helping other people, and maybe doing other leisure activity, being mindful of those things also getting both included here too. So 40%. Now, once again, I wanted to clarify because the chapter was a bit actually confusing and misleading. They said 50% of a given person's, given human's happiness level is genetically determined, which is very misleading because it sounds like 50% of your individual happiness is determined by genetics. No, 50% of variance or difference across people's happiness level is explained by genetics. It's not that 50% of your individual happiness level is determined by your genes. So that's good news, right? Because otherwise you feel like, man, 50%, it's sad. So actually this percent, you know, how much of our personal individual happiness level is explained by genes, research suggests, although we don't really know much yet, but it's very, very small, very a fraction of it. Yes, so don't worry. So there's a lot maybe we can do with the leisure too. So now, why does leisure impact our happiness? That's the question. Why? We know that it's one of the important things, but why? There are 5 main theories or explanation. First is it helps us to feel autonomous. By autonomous, we mean we can act in a self-endorsed manner. What do we mean by self-endorsed? You basically believe in that activity, whatever you're doing. For example, something intrinsically motivating is definitely like you eat ice cream, you just like it. And you can feel autonomous by, you know, eating the ice cream no matter what maybe, you know, your parents say or your wife says to you, feeling autonomous. Or even something, you know, like a gym going. You don't necessarily intrinsically motivated, but you know it's important and you value that. You value the health benefit of it. So you can act self-endorsed way. You think it's important, I'm gonna go for that gym. You feel autonomous. Second mechanism is belonging, interpersonal belonging. You feel understood by others. You feel connected to others. If you think about it, maybe your family, you feel, when was a time when you felt that you were really connected to your family, if at all? Maybe you did something leisure together with them. Camping, barbecuing, having board game together, you know, whatever that might be. If you have a partner, when was the moment that you felt that you're connected to that person? Maybe it's not necessarily just being together, right, not doing anything, but it was something that you did something, maybe had a really good conversation over a nice cup of coffee, something like that. Third theory is competence, feeling capable of bringing about, causing desired outcomes. I play badminton. You can see my badminton racket over there. Yes, I play badminton. It's in my office. And I want to do certain kind of shot, you know, like maybe backhand, certain kind of shot. And when I can do it, I feel that I'm capable. I can do this thing. And, you know, it keeps, you know, leisure offers more and more opportunity. You know, you can work on different skills. It keeps making me feel hopefully competent. Fourth mechanism is a meaning. What that means is that it's a personal attachment to activities, places, in a company, you know, companion, basically. Someone you do something together. Now, where is the place where you're attached to? When you think about that, when we ask this question, oftentimes answer is, for example, your home, your bedroom, or your backyard, a certain type of park or nature area that you spend a lot of your childhood. School, but also, you know, kind of schoolyard where you played with your friends, things like that. So there's not just the place, but also the place where you had a lot of fun, meaningful leisure activity oftentimes. And that's where you feel attached to, that's where you feel meaning to. And then leisure help you provide your life that meaningfulness. The last mechanism is the recovery. Recovery from work, recovery from, you know, maybe studying and other obligations. It's really about stress coping and relaxation. And if you think about it, right, you have this maybe part-time job, maybe you definitely have a work, you know, education, schoolwork to do. What do you do after, when you get overwhelmed and you need a stress coping? Most of the time, that's a leisure activity, right? You don't really go, for example, get stressed out in work and you don't do, schoolwork to get, do stress coping. So these are the 5 mechanisms that research suggests that leisure has very unique power in terms of influencing our happiness. The 4th benefit is pleasure, which already kind of mentioned. Pleasure is often equated to positive emotion, although there is not just a, emotional, psychological part to it. There's a bodily, like physiological components to it too. That can basically rise from sensory, based on our feelings, right? Smell, seeing, tasting, expressive, and intellectual, and other experiences. For example, to me as a Japanese person, eating good sushi it's this pleasurable experience. I mean, on my tongue, it's so pleasant, it's tasty, and I'm very, very happy when I do that. A lot of people ask, Japanese people, including me, whether we eat sushi every day. We don't. It's a celebration food, and when I do, I feel a lot of pleasure. Another thing that I do for my pleasure is singing in a shower. Let's be honest. It's a safe space. A lot of people do it. Probably many of you guys do it too. It is very pleasure for me, right? I mean, at least I feel like I'm a rock star, and it's expressive. It's expressive, thing too. Maybe not so pleasurable for my wife, who have to hear that, but it's good for me. It's a pleasurable. Now, philosophers also talked about pleasure and different approach to it too. So let's look at that. Thousands of years ago again, still Epicurus, a philosopher, he established something called Epicureanism, according to which pleasure should be experienced in moderation. That means not too much, not too little. And the best kind of pleasure is actually intellectual. What do we mean by intellectual pleasure? When you study something new and it interests you, it excites you, inspires you. And when you face some problem that you cannot really solve, like in mathematics or whatever, and then finally you get that breakthrough and you go like, aha, when you feel that pleasure maybe somewhere here up in the brain, that's what we're talking about. The other approach to it, though, is proposed by Aristippus. He's in this right side picture, and he created what is called hedonism. According to that, pleasure through very simple, in a way, primitive pleasure, like bodily, fame-based, power-based, wealth, money-based pleasure is the best, highest goal of life. Sounds very superficial, but it's a one way to look at it too, right? There are different approaches to pleasure as well. Now, there's a psychologist called Barbara Fredrickson. She got really famous with her theory called broaden and build, which identifies important roles of positive emotion in a human evolution. Yes. According to this theory, positive emotion broadens or widens our perspective and helps us to find a creative solution for the problem, whatever problem we are facing, which builds our cognitive and other resources. So once you have a creative solution, next time when you face the same problem, you already have that past experience and you can use that as your resource. That's what I mean. So broaden and then build a resource. Broaden perspective, build resources. Now, how many times you feel like you have assignment and you feel like you're stuck, you don't know what to write about, and maybe you go for a run and you just make your mind, distracted off of it. And then that's the moment you feel like, and then you get a positive emotion, hopefully, by running, and you feel good. And that's the moment you go like, hey, what about that idea? What about this? Right? You get that aha moment when you're feeling really good. And oftentimes that involves leisure. Maybe you're singing or, whatever that might be. So there's that relationship between leisure and their positive emotion and maybe even human evolution. Contrarily though, negative emotion, and we have a ton of evidence for this, negative emotion limits, narrows our choice and our perspective. For example, when you face something fearful, like a bear, this fight or flight mentality kicks in. That's because of negative emotion. Negative emotion have that evolutional, like survival instinct, basically. So the positive emotion actually does the opposite. There is some evidence for that too. So leisure is very unique in that way. Now we talked about both eudaimonic well-being, right? Something like excellence and or morality. And we talked about hedonic stuff like pleasure, ice cream, those things. Now maybe you are wondering, and you should be wondering, is leisure primarily eudaimonic or hedonic? How is that? Now there's a big research by South Korean researcher Choi and his colleagues, and they basically follow about 600 South Korean people for weeks to see if each activity, so many activities they have done, and if each one is considered by them meaningful or eudaimonic in their definition, or happy, hedonic, or both. And here are a list of 10 leisure activities that I extracted from their study. And I'm going to color code them to show you how they're different in terms of eudaimonic versus hedonic. So in terms of meaningfulness or eudaimonic, exercising and volunteering were very meaningful eudaimonic experiences. Volunteer makes sense, right? Doing good thing. Exercising, maybe you're working on your body, health, maybe pursuing excellence, depending on their context. What about happiness and hedonic of the remaining 8? What do you think are red ones? These are shopping, makes sense. Drinking, yeah. Drinking as in alcohol. And listening to music, makes sense. Watching a movie, okay, there's a fun activity. They're pleasant, they're hedonic activity. And lastly, these are both mixture. Eating, socializing, maybe socializing makes sense, taking a trip, dating. Maybe some of them are a bit, you're wondering, why would that be? For example, eating, isn't it more of a hedonic activity, like a pleasant feeling? Possibly, but also you have to think about who you're eating with, for example. You're eating with your partner, or you're eating, feeding your children too when you're eating. Maybe then it's more of a family activity, it's more of a meaningful activity rather than just for yourself feeling good, right? Taking a trip, that sounds like, vacation, that sounds like a hedonic thing to do. Again, but that also depends on, trip can be taken together with the family, your parents, your children, making a family memory, for example, doing something more of a good thing, right thing to do for your family. Maybe it could be, especially in the South Korean and the Asian cultural context, maybe that's why it's a bit of a mixture. Yeah. Okay, so that concludes 4th benefit. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to see you on the 3rd video.